good morning to all of you. I want to actually take this next few minutes to really go one or two levels deeper and talk about making all of the discussion you've heard a little bit real, or where are some of the challenges. I mean, yes, all of these things are possible. And actually let's take a step back, right? We heard since morning the rate of change is accelerating. We are seeing an S&P 500 company essentially getting replaced every 2 weeks. You heard about dramatic shifts in customer experience, and all of them are actually likely to come down the path. And all of this is going to be driven by technology. Whether you call it AI, whether you call it other machine learning, doesn't really matter. But if you take a step back and ask yourself, what is preventing most organizations from truly leveraging the power of these emerging technologies? And there are some interesting insights that you will find. I mean, the first one is that while we're talking about all these transformations that are going to be driven by technology, if you look at most of your organizations and ask how exactly is your own technology being run, managed, right? It is still heavily manual. Right? We have divided every organization into so many layers and silos that nobody knows end to end. We just heard about real-time understanding of every customer's journey and every click. You should actually ask yourself a very simple question. When your website goes down, right? How long does it take to actually bring it back up? It's many hours. And you know actually what happens, what is the standard operating procedure for bringing your website back up so that your customers are not impacted? You bring everybody and their brother who you think is likely to know anything about this into what is called an incident bridge and argue with each other. Right? Until somebody weak, usually the network guy says it's most likely my problem. And then you figure out it is not network problem, it's somebody else's problem. And you spend 90% of the time arguing with each other whose problem it is. Right? That's the reality on the ground today for most enterprises. Right? I mean, there are so many examples. 60 to 80% of the outages that most large banks see today are actually because of, are resulting from changes that are actually getting introduced. And when you introduce a change over the weekend, you find out something is going to break sometime during the next week. And you have by that time forgotten which change has actually contributed to this. Nobody is able to see the relationship between change and the impact whatsoever in most organizations, right? And so on and so forth. I mean, you can actually keep going through this link. I mean, we rely so heavily in every company that is represented here. I'm sure if you go back and ask how your IT and operations run, all of these things are actually true, right? So in some sense, while on one hand we are talking about changing the world using AI and intelligence and augmented intelligence, if you just you sort of take the look under the hood inside your own enterprise, we are far from it, just to even apply that to yourself, right? So it's sort of funny that while we are talking about using augmented intelligence to transform everything that you possibly see, but we are not using augmented intelligence to transform the way the enterprise is designed, built, and run today, right? It's sort of an interesting observation. So I want to use the next few minutes to actually talk about what is happening and why what most organizations are doing today is falling short. So virtually everyone today, in every company that you can actually go and study, is embracing this notion of robotic automation, or many times called robotic process automation. And essentially what they do is they take an operating procedure for performing any task, any activity, you sort of in effect record and replay. And what that actually does is it eliminates a lot of the effort that is involved in performing these repetitive activities. So it probably helps save a little bit of cost. But that's not where the problem is actually. In fact, we did fairly detailed studies in some of the largest enterprises in US, UK, and globally. And we found some interesting statistics, right? That 65 to 70% of the volume of activities that happens in any enterprise today, whether it is actually supporting customer experience, whether it's supporting your IT, and so on and so forth, they are actually indeed procedural in nature, but interestingly, they actually account for only 20 to 25% of effort. And in fact, there's the remaining 30% of the volume of activity as what are often called judgment activities that require human judgment or human intelligence. And interestingly, most of these procedural activities that people do within your organizations actually are sandwiched between judgmental activities. So it's actually very difficult to do anything end-to-end without really, if you will, augmenting or automating the judgmental activities. And that's why most organizations who are embarking on this journey are only able to barely scratch the surface of what is the art of the possible. Interestingly, the last bullet point here is very interesting. You heard, I think a couple of speakers ago, you heard the 100 to 1 rule of thumb ratio, right? It's an interesting point. The point there was, it takes you 100 times more to teach a machine to do something than what the amount of time it takes a human to record exactly the same thing. Now just put that in line with the last point. Once you have taught the machine something, how to do something, it's brilliant if what you want to do is not changing. Right? Look around your enterprise and ask how many things in your companies are not changing. And if you think it is low percentage, please talk to me, because I think you would be the exception, not the norm. Everything changes in your enterprise all the time. Right? The way you run your business, the way you do customer interaction, and the compliance regulations that you have to adhere to, or the security attacks that you are essentially dealing with, cyber security attacks, whatever, are changing every day. So what was normal yesterday is no longer normal today, and definitely not going to be normal tomorrow. Right? In fact, we did another interesting study, and we found that 60 to 80% of what is considered normal today, and if I automate using that 100 to 1 effort, in 6 months it is essentially obsolete. Less than 6 months it is obsolete. And if you just keep multiplying that 100 to 1 again and again for the same activity because it's changing, that's where you realize where the problem is. To truly achieve the potential. So the whole problem is that the way we are doing these things today within most enterprises is robotic and somewhat dumb in its approach. So, you go to the next slide, please. So if you actually study this problem a little bit more carefully, you realize that there are 4 different types of activities most of us do on a daily basis. Most experts do. Of course, the first one is procedural, but you just click through next 2-3 clicks. There are 3 other types of activities. First one is investigative activities. So you observe a symptom, but you have no idea what the cause is. Right? But you have to essentially go from symptom to cause. Right? Your sale for a particular SKU is down this morning, or your customer journeys are getting abandoned at a rate faster than yesterday at this time. We have no idea. That's a symptom. Right? You want to actually find out a cause. Because only if you can do this in real time, you have some hope of actually taking an action and addressing it. So that's investigative activities. The second type of activity, one level more sophisticated, are analytical activities, which basically try to understand what is normal behavior and what is abnormal. Why do you even think that what you're seeing right now is worthy of your attention? Right? It is worthy of your attention only because what you are seeing is inherently deemed abnormal with respect to what you consider as normal, which you have actually learned over a period of time. Right? And the most sophisticated activity is planning activity, which is basically asking and answering what if and if what questions. What if questions is, what happens if you introduce this change or perturbation in the system? What is the impact of that change? And if what question is, if you want to actually accommodate this change, what should you do? Right? And this is exactly what actually, these are the types of activities that sandwich simple procedural activities. And if you don't know how to actually do them, you will never actually be able to achieve the potential of what sort of AI promises. We go one more click, please. So let me demystify this notion of cognitive or AI for you a little bit, right? So if you actually look inside, underneath the covers, if you will, of these class of activities that we talked about, there is 3 types of intelligence that one needs to have. And invariably in popular praise, we get fascinated by only one of the 3, perhaps the least important of the 3. But let me actually explain to you what are the 3 things that are needed for you to actually carry out these interesting activities. The first one is recognition intelligence, which is basically understand structured or semi-structured or unstructured data sources and derive some information from it, right? Whether it is mining text to understand sentiments or mining text to understand what the customer is trying to say, or analyzing a photograph to identify there is a cat in this picture, or analyzing a video to understand that there is an event that you can actually observe in this video sequence. That is recognition intelligence. This is something that we do naturally today, right? But that's not enough. That's just a starting point. What is needed to actually convert anything that you have recognized into actions is what I would call recognition intelligence and, reasoning intelligence and operative intelligence. Reasoning intelligence is all about actually answering the what, when, why questions. Based on what you have understood your context is, what should you do right now? So going back to the problems that we were talking about earlier, website is down, where exactly is the problem? Right? And why is the problem existing? So can you identify a root cause? That's reasoning intelligence. The ability to reason about a complex environment that is actually consisting of many different moving parts and actually reason about it. And then what you need is operative intelligence. So what reasoning intelligence usually gives you is the ability to determine what, when, why, but the next step is to actually operationalize it. So you heard by the previous speaker, the key to everything is real time. And real time essentially means that you don't only want suggestive recommendations, you want prescriptive recommendations that can be actioned immediately. Only then you can actually create a real time system, right? And to go to prescription and action, you need operative intelligence that actually allows you to convert what, when, why to how. How do you perform an action to actually carry out that activity? So, we have built this engine called Ignio. I think there is a booth outside you probably want to just take a look at, which incorporates all 3 components: the recognition intelligence, the reasoning intelligence, and operative intelligence. And operative intelligence has been designed for, as one of the speakers said earlier, if you want to actually go from suggestions to prescriptions and actions and get this engine to behave like an expert, you have to actually make the engine knowledgeable about the domain that you are actually dealing with. So with Ignio, what we have done is we have taught Ignio a lot of intelligence or knowledge about the domain of enterprise technology and operations, such that it can actually attack the heart of your problem that will enable each of your companies to indeed embrace and execute this kind of an agile journey, right? So if you just go to the next chart, I want to give you one simple example just to actually show you the complexity even just within your technology and operations today, within most of your organizations. So I mean, we are in New York City, there are lots of financial services organizations around. If you go to any one of them and ask them, they all run large batch environments. Basically, they do nightly batch processing of everything, every transaction that happens every day. You go to any large company today, they run anywhere from 250,000 to more than 1 million batch jobs every night, with tens of millions of precedence relationships. There is nobody in any of these enterprises that actually understand the entire batch complexity. And we are constantly firefighting. They're dealing with millions of alerts that happens on a given day. And if there is a problem that happens right now, you firefight, but you have no idea what is the impact of that problem to be seen 2 hours from now, right? So, because of which you essentially are constantly dealing with firefighting unexpected outages, unexpected delays, and essentially business outages that are incredibly expensive to deal with. But the magnitude of the problem is large because you're dealing with a very large volume of data that we talked about. Instead of looking at customer journeys, this is actually looking at, if you will, the back office functionality. Even that is enormously complicated, right? And it's, so what does Ignio do in this particular case? We go to the next slide. This is the last chart all around. The first thing it does is, remember I told you, the first thing you need to do is have the recognition intelligence, the ability to understand the batch environment within your enterprise, right? So what Ignio does is that it basically taps into a large number of unstructured, semi-structured data sources that you have within the enterprise, typically thousands, if not tens of thousands in number. And then it builds, essentially self-learns the entire batch context to say, what exactly does your batch environment look like? And then it learns what is normal behavior today, what is abnormal, and so on. And it uses this with reasoning intelligence to actually determine what is likely to happen 2 hours from now or 3 hours from now, so that it can predict and thereby take preventive actions in order to ensure that those things actually don't happen. So it is combining recognition intelligence, which is basically the ability to build that 360-degree view of batch environment, with reasoning intelligence to actually generate predictions, with operative intelligence to actually take corrective actions and thereby actually self-heal the environment before that problem actually becomes a real problem. And that's exactly what you need to do in order to achieve some of the fancier examples that we talked about. So just last slide, what does this do? And this is actually just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what technology like this can do within your enterprise. So actually for some of the large banks in US and UK, we are starting to show that 90% of what is going to happen today, I can predict with fairly high degree of accuracy, and thereby actually prevent what is going to happen. So essentially start saying goodbye to some of these firefighting and business outages that happen. The last bullet point is actually very interesting. So most organizations today, as we talked about earlier, are going through massive and rapid change. So one of the biggest questions each one of you will have to keep answering is, will you be able to accommodate, let's say, the digital growth that is going to happen within your enterprise? Today, to answer a question like this will require some of your core experts to spend weeks, if not months, to answer that question. By the time they get you the answer, that answer is already wrong, because it's based on 2 months old data. Right. With something like Ignio now, you can actually answer those questions in a matter of 1 to 2 hours, because it has built that context awareness and can actually do what if what reasoning to actually start. So I think when you are looking at embarking on this journey within your enterprise, I would say that look at these problems carefully, because there are indeed several challenges that you will have to overcome. The last thing I want to say is that as you are embarking on this journey and you consider technologies like Ignio and so on, you should also realize that implementing these kinds of AI first or augmented intelligence first kind of approaches within your enterprise, it's not the same as implementing yet another technology tool, because it fundamentally changes everything. In fact, it changes the role of people within your enterprise. The role of people actually shifts from doers of work to creators and curators of knowledge, because something like Ignio will actually do the work for you, but it has to be taught. Remember that 100 to 1 rule of thumb and so on, right? So the role of people fundamentally changes. And it's interesting to also ask yourself the question, how many people in your organization can play that role today? Creators and curators of knowledge, right? That's why this is not just a technology implementation problem, it is an organizational transformation opportunity, and the ones that will actually embrace this are definitely likely to not get removed from the S&P 500. But I think it's a tremendous opportunity for all of us. But I would certainly encourage you to look at these problems carefully because this is not as easy as it sounds. So thank you very much.